And we are alive, back again this morning with without the guest that I had intended to have today. But I have a little bit different plans scheduled this morning for you. I want to talk a little bit about a couple of things that came across my Twitter feed yesterday. And I started to write something about it yesterday, which became a little bit of an issue for me. There was this article that came out that I thought was really quite important and quite interesting. And I noticed that some of my friends from center right picked up on the article and started passing it around a little bit. I'm going to share it here if I can find it real quick. Let's do this. Here is the article. Toya, good morning. I see you there. Tamika Henry, good morning. I see you there too also. Appreciate you guys for coming. Again, this morning, as I was just saying, I have a different show planned for today than I originally had planned yesterday because I have a guest today. Charles Barone was going to join us from DFER, from Democrats for Education Reform. He's not able to join us today, but we're going to reschedule him for another time. So I thought that I would just jump in and have kind of like a talk with you all, folks who come here every day, about a couple of things that came across my Twitter over the last couple of days. One or two of these things became part of something that I was writing, and I just stopped because I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. So here you go. You get to have this conversation with me a little bit this morning. The first article was something that I had my friends who were center-right friends passing around, and it's this article called In Defense of Looting. So there's two articles I want to bump up against each other because I had friends on the right pass this one around and start talking about it. And it seemed to me to be like one of those things that is so absolutely absurd that I didn't know what to do with it because I actually don't really know who is really defending looting. But the problem with In Defense of Looting is that on its face, it seems absurd, no matter what side of the political aisle you are on, no matter what you believe. It just doesn't seem like there's many people who are really defending looting. But then the more I thought about it, if I'm being honest, there were people in my world or in my network who did have a slight defense of the looting. So when we saw everything blow up after the George Floyd riots, uprising, whatever you want to call it, in Minneapolis and then in other places, there would be a lot of tisk finger wagging about the looting part of it, not about the peaceful protesting part of it, not about the injustices done that started the riots and that made people go out and protest. Let's just start with protests first. But the result that would happen afterwards, which is people breaking windows at AutoZone and then Target and then Wendy's and then burning down surrounding businesses, small businesses and corporate businesses. And when that would come up, that would be a great place to gravitate for people who did not want to talk about the injustices that started the protest in the first place. And for people who didn't want to see the initial protesters as being peaceful people who were just exercising their American right to protest and bringing grievances to their government. But they actually wanted it to be about the looters, which is a small group. From what I know, in all the protests I've ever been in, is that it's not the clergy and the organizers and the people from nonprofits and the people who are from unions and others who are out protesting peacefully who cause the most destruction when it comes to looting. It's always that anarchist small group. And oftentimes, from what I've seen, especially here in the Twin Cities, their only purpose in coming is to hijack a peaceful protest and then start looting, which is shameful because then it becomes easy for everybody to talk just about that part, the looting part. So So where I was going with that was to say, I've always been against looting. I was always taught that stealing is wrong. Period. I don't know how you were raised. I don't know what your parents told you. My father told me two things: if you ever steal and it becomes a problem, ever find out that you've been arrested or you've got in trouble for stealing whatnot, don't come home. He also said, if you get a tattoo and an earring, don't come home. I got the earring at one point in life. I didn't get the tattoo, but so I was just always taught that. So when this comes up and people start talking about looting and defending it, it's not a large group of people, right? And I do have sympathy for the argument that is made for the looting that takes place. But I won't go into that because that's not the purpose of this conversation and why I'm bringing it up. Mice is back again. I see you, man. We agree on nothing else. I see. So see, this is someone who would probably agree with looting and defend looting. The reason that I bring this up, though, is because I saw this as a non-issue. I don't think this is a real argument. I don't think that there's a lot of people honestly arguing about whether or not looting is good. I think the majority of people believe that stealing is wrong. And in a moral society, I think most people believe that. I believe there are some other arguments about capitalism and, the idea that some communities have been taken to task by capitalist organizations and corporations. Certainly Target doesn't seem to me to rise to the top of that group, for one. And two, I do want to say unintended consequences is something that anarchists never think about. The kind of irresponsible, break the windows, just tear everything down. Mostly, honestly, to be very honest with you, a bunch of college kids who want to try on their revolutionary drag for a couple of days and, wear masks and come and break things down and do all that stuff. And then the thugs that come in with them. The thing that they don't pay attention to is that, like, just a couple of blocks from the Target in Minneapolis, for instance, are multiple public housing sites that now all of a sudden can't get diapers and formula and things that they need. And oh, by the way, because of all the lootings and everything, the city cut off transportation. So now you have actually real living mothers and families who are cut off from something because of something they didn't even do. Doesn't even have anything to do with them. But anyways, let me stop digressing, because the point of this isn't about the looting. It's about the fact that I had so many conservative friends that were passing this article around basically to say, see how silly and crazy those folks are on the left. They don't want to talk about George Floyd. They don't want to talk about a man dying in the street. They don't want to talk about over-policing or the militarization of police. They don't want to talk about asset forfeitures, which is something that as people right of center, conservatives and libertarians, they should care about. They don't want to talk about any of that. They want to talk about the wacky liberals defending looting, which almost no one is doing. So then some of the same friends passed around this article. And this article is about the disdain for the less educated. And they're saying this is the last acceptable prejudice. And this is what they were saying as they were passing this around is what has tanked the Democratic Party. They're saying that the Democratic Party has become so technocratic, so much about educational merit, so much about degrees in college, that's why we have Trump now. And if you read this article, and I'm going to put the link to this in the comments so that you guys can all see it. If you read this article, basically what it says is that over time, the very educated have become more and more democratic in their voting. And because of that, they have seen everything in terms of a college degree. And if you don't have a college degree, then you are part of the outclass. And because of that, people in the outclass, which is, let's be honest, at least half to 2/3 of Americans don't have any college. I think it's only a third that have a college degree. That's all of Americans. That's not white Americans, because the number goes up when you talk about just about the professional class of white Americans. So it was interesting to me that they are saying two things to you at once. My conservative friends are saying two things at once, which is the looting and the underclass that is demanding and fighting their rights for their rights are wrong. And at the same time, they're saying that Democrats have left behind those who don't have a college degree, but are working class people who don't have a lot of education and who deserve to be treated every bit as important in society as anybody else. So basically, they're saying that Republicans are the party of the regular people, the working class, the folks who have had their jobs shipped overseas, the folks who have seen their communities completely destroyed by globalism and corporatism. And the Democratic Party is the party of Ivy League, high-minded elites. There's this word in here, meritocratic elites. So elites who believe in the merit of education. And this says that the Democratic Party has become the party of technocratic liberalism. And it's basically saying that it's more agreeable to the professional classes than the blue collar and middle class voters who once constituted its base. So friends, those of you watching this right now, what do you think about even this that I've just said, the setup that on one hand, underclass people, looters, people who are fighting for their rights, who don't want to be over policed, people who are tired of stop and frisk, people who are tired of not being able to walk 3 steps in some places without being asked for their ID or where are you going, where are you coming from, whatever. And that's supposed to be amongst the folks in democratic cities, if you listen to the right and to conservatives. But that's the underclass, right? But the party of the elites, the corporatists, the globalists, the Ivy Leaguers or whatnot is the Democratic Party. So what do you think about that? First, I'll ask you. Now, as we talk about that, I want to play a clip real quick for you. I want to play this clip. And this will give us some context of where I'm going with this argument, because I'm really, really, really tired of this idea that the reason that Hillary Clinton lost to Trump is not because of there being a nativist, racialist, nationalist strain that Trump tapped into that drove people to come to the polls for him, but just because underclass people were tired of being dominated by elites in the Democratic side of the party, on the Democratic side, and they saw Republicans as their salvation for that. So I'm going to play this real quick, and I'll come back.
Been to a Trump rally before?
No, sir.
What are your expectations?
Truth.
Truth. At a Trump rally?
Yeah.
Good luck.
Barack Obama had a big part of 9/11.
Which part?
Not being around, always on vacation, never in the office.
Why do you think Barack Obama wasn't in the Oval Office on 9/11?
That I don't know. We'd like to get to the bottom of that.
We don't even know if he's a citizen.
Yeah, if you don't look at the birth certificate, there's almost no evidence there.
Exactly.
So there's nothing Barack Obama could do to prove that he was born here.
If there was maybe witnesses that were attendants at his birth.
Like his mother? Would you listen to his mother?
No. She has motivation to lie.
So you don't trust Donald Trump's birth certificate either?
Yeah, because he's been here forever.
Well, how do you know? But what's your proof?
Well, his parents and.
But no, but they're biased. I'm talking about like people who could be in the room.
Why would they be biased?
Well, like I'm just using your logic against you.
Okay.
Outside of having no proof, what proof do you have?
I don't have any.
You don't have any proof.
My opinion.
Your opinion. And what's your source?
Just Facebook or Twitter. I mean, everything. And
So you'll look at like facts and bull. You'll put it all together.
Exactly.
Obama is a Muslim. He's a terrorist. Nobody will ever tell me different. Do I have proof? No. Do I have articles? No.
But your mind is made up without any information.
My mind is made up.
I don't think the media really portrays all the African Americans that support Donald Trump. That's
Right. So what should we be portraying? Where are these African Americans? When you literally look out across the 400, 500 people here, we don't see any. They'll wave. Wave, white people. Yeah. It's like a Dave Matthews concert. Except Dave Matthews actually has African Americans in his band. Tell me when you see somebody who is not white.
Here, right here. Thank you, brother.
Donald Trump don't even know how much a loaf of bread or a dozen of eggs cost.
So you don't even support Donald Trump?
No.
Okay, so he didn't work. In other words, a classic Trump rally full of misogynistic t-shirts.
Trump that bitch.
Minorities getting kicked the out. And Trump supporters like this reacting to minority protesters.
We have named these guys the Black Cockroach Ninjas.
You're not even trying to hide the racism anymore.
What? You're at a Trump rally.
I know, right? Fill in the blank for me.
Okay. So I don't even know where to go with that, except to say this. When we talk about the less educated and the more educated, and we have these arguments about which party is best for which, and who really represents who, this is what's important to me. What's important to me is that thinking people do not forfeit their country to people who are not thinking people, and that we are witnessing right now the material consequences of a society that stops having its thinking people be the ones who lead. That can sound elitist, and I don't care at this point. 4 years ago, when we were talking about this, it was kind of a new argument that we had left behind the hillbillies and that this was their revolt. And you had books like Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. And that book was meant to tell us that the reason that we got what we deserved was because there had been this populist uprising of people who had had enough of being talked down to by, what this article tells us, are a cognitive elite. People with degrees, people with too much education, people who have too much time on their hands, people who disdain the less educated. And here's my point about that is it was a seductive argument for a time because all of us hate elites. All of us believe that there are people and groups in our society that want to look down on other people, people who have more money, people who have more power, people who live in better neighborhoods, people who go to better schools. Even within a school, oftentimes there are groups and cliques of people that want to be seen as better than the other group. There are people that want the labels on their clothing to articulate a message to everybody that they are better than you. And that is something in the United States that is universally hated and always has been. So I get the seductiveness of the argument that a cognitive elite, that they had it coming, that it was their time. They had it coming, and that the hillbillies revolted and they took their country back. And now, if you want to participate in their country now, in the country of the people like this that I just showed you in the video, low information voters who can't be persuaded by reason or facts, who don't have the education to engage in sophisticated arguments, but it's their country, not yours. And their party is the Republican Party. I'm not saying that. That's what the argument says, is basically that's the reason that they voted for Trump. Would you hear in the message in that video, in those voters, that said anything about the reason that they were there and the reason that they are voting for Trump is because they feel left behind by the cognitive elite? There are a lot of other prejudices in there, but that didn't seem to be one of them. Now, I want to say this. This isn't about Trump and the right or the left. This, to me, I have to say, this article that I'm showing you right now was passed around by conservative friends to say, see, this is what we've been saying for a couple of years. The Democratic Party deserves it. They've become too high and mighty with their Ivy League people. In fact, the presidential candidate that they're running right now, Joe Biden, is the first Democratic candidate or any candidate in decades who doesn't have an Ivy League degree, right? So you had it coming. But the funny thing is, this article was also passed around by some people on the left. Saw it this morning, tweeted by Jennifer Berkshire, the former Edgeshyster, who's a union paid contractor who campaigns against school choice and campaigns against school reform. And she basically passed this article around to say, see, this is proof that education reform gave you Donald Trump. That was her point. So everybody's seizing on the way that the party, the Democratic Party, which, by the way, let's just challenge this idea a little bit. The Democratic Party that was saying that you should have cheaper or free college, universal health care, better benefits for paternity and maternity leave, better benefits in general overall, that almost universally, disproportionately help the working class and the poor. That was the party that was leaving the working class poor behind. And the party fighting all of those things in favor of giving tax cuts to very wealthy individuals, that was the party of the common man. And this is why education is important. Education is important so that people have the cognitive defensive ability to wade through crap like that in terms of intellectual arguments and call it what it is and understand it. But if you don't have an education, you're totally disabled from participating in any of these discussions and in a moral nation, in a nation that is a thinking country. We have not been a thinking country for at least 4 years. Some will say, and some of you in the comments, you might say we haven't been for a very long time, but I will say for sure in the last 4 years. Again, I'll put that to you in the comments. You guys tell me what you think. L. Michelle Johnson says, I will always feel that trumpets simply don't want the demographics of the country to change. This is a sophisticated argument. The Browning of America. How many people have been around since hearing that since the 80s? The Browning of America, the Browning of America, the Browning of America. You've heard dates that in the future, by 2020, by 2025, by 2030, America will no longer be a majority white country. It'll be a majority of color country, not a majority black or brown or whatever, but just of color. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, our school systems crossed over, where the majority of the babies coming into the school system for the first time ever were of color, right? And there will be people that will make a sophisticated argument, as L. Michelle Johnson. And if I'm messing up your argument, Michelle Johnson, let me know. But there will be people who make the sophisticated argument. In my mind, it's sophisticated, that one of the reasons that you see this populist backlash is not because people are feeling beat up upon by a technocratic, merit-based educational elite, a cognitive elite, but because they see what's coming down the pipe for them. And, you know, I think that leads me to a point that I think is pretty interesting to look at. I'm just going to put this up here. So if you look at like the voters, you know, over time, it gets a little bit more, you know, I can't make any decisive calls about who voted for who and why they did it and all of that stuff. That's a much deeper, richer conversation than I'm going to have here right now. But I do know if you look at this, it starts to complicate that working class narrative, right? First of all, Trump and Romney, his predecessor as a presidential candidate from the right, from the Republican Party, both won just about the same amount of whites. And Hillary did not do as well with people of color. So that's one of the reasons that that she lost, that complicates this conversation I'm having right now. But when we talk about the working class and the left behind and the forgotten, we always talk about the working class as if that's the heartland of white America. And then people of color are separate from that. They're not part of the white working class. And if you look at who Trump won, look at this down here, right? So Trump's white support was pretty consistent with what you always see. So it was really kind of his white voters versus everybody. And these other folks, blacks and Hispanics, aren't they part of the working class? Aren't they part of the class that is at the wrong end of the educational spectrum? If there was ever a cause to be said that there was an educational elite who was running over the little people, the people who don't have as much. Wouldn't that include Black and Hispanic folks who, in the largest of large numbers, did not vote for Trump? Can't really just be a class-based thing. Now, I don't know if this is Sade Richardson or Sade Richardson. Don't let me mess up your name. But she says, this is America. We're not focused on being American, though. It's weird that patriotism and conservatism have become synonymous with racist. Okay. It's also a little bit weird that when you have people protesting for their lives, that one of the responses from anti-protesters are folks that want to put them down are chants of USA, USA, USA. That when people come to terrorize you in your community with a bunch of cars to say everything that you're feeling bad about and you're hurt about right now in terms of injustices in your community, we want to dismiss it by driving through your neighborhoods with American flags and Trump flags. And we want to wrap our hostility to your protests for your rights in the American flag, which to me in some ways is probably one of the most un-American things ever. When we think about protests, do we consider the fact that America was started with a protest? A Black protester, as a matter of fact. I mean, this is kind of myth. It's kind of legendary. I don't know if it's absolutely true, but you have Crispus Attucks who comes out of a bar. He sees British guards. He's tired of their crap. He's tired of the over-policing. He's tired of them being the foot soldiers of an elite, not a cognitive elite, of an economic elite. And he says, I'm not going to take this crap anymore. And what does he do? He starts a fight. And that fight starts America. There is nothing more American than protest. So patriotism, if patriotism leads you to say that because a football player kneeled during the playing of a song, that he is disrespecting everything that we are about, is weird. It's weird that conservatives would conflate patriotism themselves down to blind compliance with the singing of a song, the putting of a hand on a heart during the playing of that song, a flag, cloth, over people fighting for their rights not to die in a street because they have overly aggressive, steroids pumped individuals with badges, guns, tasers, who come to their communities from the suburbs and from other places to over-police them. Protesting against that is not patriotic in the minds of the people who come to chant USA, 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 or Trump, Trump, Trump. And this is the problem with thinking people ceding to unthinking people. I think it's happening on both sides, right? And I could say everything that I'm saying right now. I could say it about the left. I could say it about Democrats. But I want to stick with this article because it drives me crazy that we think that anybody will say that education is a bad thing. Becoming educated is somehow a negative. Improving yourself through education, learning, developing your world fund of information is a bad thing. And, to be fair, if you want to ask me how that shows up on the left, this is how it shows up on the left also. When we talk about education, after years of getting beat up in K-12 education, after years of feeling like you were suffering bruising losses as people who support the American public education system, which, as I tweeted this morning, is pretty rigged, and the blueprint of it is inequitable. It's not a flaw. It's actually the way that it's designed. But people who have been defending that system for a long time against claims that it was failing and it was not doing well in terms of outcomes have come to start saying things like college isn't for everybody. Well, they agree with some of the conservatives about that. College is not for everybody. This article that I'm talking about right now, the disdain for the less educated is the last accepted prejudice. And this is like pro-uneducated claptrap here. Who's it written by? A professor at Harvard. which is exactly the leftist type of do as I say, not as I do, progressivism, progressives, which is basically to say college isn't ever for everybody. It's for me and it's for my kids, but it's not for you. It may not be for you, and that's fine. It's to say that public education is a public good and we should all participate in it, but I'm not going to participate in the schools that I want to trap other people's kids in. I don't think that there should be any school choice. I don't think that kids should be able to get out of the education deserts that they live in, but I got out. That's also a left way of looking at this situation. People on the left who say things like that and do things like that know that education was the gateway to the middle class that got them out of their previous standards of living when they were immigrants. When their grandfathers or great-grandfathers came here from other countries, education was the gateway to the middle class that got them through. Right. And then the GI Bill at some point got them through higher education, not just K-12, but higher education in big numbers. And they became the ruling class of the United States. So in some ways, I'm confused by this argument because the left and the right are sharing this kind of false patriotism with the underclass and the working class. They're both saying you don't have to have a college degree to be considered important. And education, the people who've become so educated are now this dominant class of people, and they're the problem. And dumb people should take the country over, right? And my problem with that is this. Number one, like looting, I was always taught that stealing is wrong. And I was always taught that self-improvement and education was good. I was never taught that education was something to be ashamed of. I didn't always take that advice. I self-educated in a lot of ways, but I was never, ever taught that not being educated was noble or it was a smart thing. And I think in the last few years, what we are seeing right now is that it was cute 4 years ago to have these conversations about how the proletariat was rising up, that the people who weren't very educated were taking their country back. It was cute then. A little distressing, but cute. 4 years on now, with people who still believe that Barack Obama was not born in the United States and that the deep state is responsible for all the negative things that are being said about this current administration, and that a host of other really ridiculous claims that are being made are all the product of fake news. What we see is the complete coup de grace of unthinking people that have created an American idiocy that will be our downfall. If thinking, educated people don't stop being ashamed of their thinking and their educations and take their country back, because it belongs to those who are worthy of living in a fact-based universe where reason matters, where facts matter, and where we don't have people who literally believe that the former president was not born in the United States. Anyways, I'm going to go back to your comments here. Michelle Johnson says, racism is racist. Patriotism and conservatism have not become synonymous with racist. That person who kneels is expressing himself patriotically. And I think what Michelle Johnson is saying in this is, once again, we need to reclaim terms, right? So what the right has done is conflated patriotism with blind loyalty to the country as it is and as it was, without any questions, without any type of straying from that, or else you are un-American. It is not anyone else who's conflating patriotism, because as I laid out, I believe it's very patriotic to, when you see an injustice done by your state or your government, to protest it. That's been American from the very get-go. Toya What do you say? Northern philanthropists trying to control the type of education our babies receive. Toy, you're going to have to tell me more about that in the comments. I don't know what you're meaning to say there. Northern philanthropists trying to control the type of education our babies receive. Yeah, type something in there. Let me know more what you're talking about. I actually don't 100% get that, or if anybody else knows what that is, let me know. Let's talk about it. Michelle Johnson also says Black people are constantly expressing patriotism because they fight to force this country to live up to its constitutional ideals. And I love this point, right? Black people right now are under fire because they are protesting abuses that they see every day that maybe you don't see where you live. So you can flippantly brush aside the real concerns that they have and lump all of that together with some sort of militant, radical, liberal agenda when it's actually no such thing. It's a continuing fight that people who have been in the margins of American society have fought for years, which is stop telling us how great you are as a country if you're not willing to live up to that greatness. Stop telling us what your creeds are. Stop talking about freedom and liberty if I can't walk 10 feet without, like I said before, an overstuffed suburbanite with a badge and a gun who has no ability to have bedside manner with the people that they are policing, has completely forgotten that who they work for, which is the citizens, taxpayers, which we are a part of, right? As African Americans. So I agree with you, Michelle. Black folks have been super patriotic, have fought in wars, even as the country wasn't treating them well, has defended this country, even as the country wasn't defending them. Even as the country was sicking dogs on them, you had very patriotic African Americans, my grandfathers on both sides being, and great grandfathers being amongst those folks who fought for this country, even as the country was paying them half as much as everybody else was getting paid, capitalizing them and giving them way more benefits than everybody else was getting, which had a material compounding impact over several generations, which people don't want to talk about. Going back to Toya, I'm going back to the book, The Education of Blacks in the South. Everyone has an agenda to hold us back. Okay. That's kind of like the fear of the Black Planet. Toya, I see you doing your public enemy this morning. I agree with you. I'm not going to fight you on it. Mott says, I'm going to put this up here. Charter schools are not a choice. It's a false choice. I mean, I don't know what to do with that, right? This to me is like, this is the left version of the Trump voter, right? This is the left version saying things that just don't make any sense at all and don't live up in reality. Charter schools are just another kind of school. There's a magnet school, there's an open school, there's a charter school, there's a traditional district schools. There are schools that teach back to the basics. There are schools that teach Montessori. There are all different kinds of wildly groups, assortments of schools. So you could say magnet schools aren't a choice. They're a false choice. Okay. You can say Montessori schools are not a choice. They're a false choice. Okay. Residentially assigned schools where you are assigned by your address, knowing that addresses are deeply related to inequities and the redlining of opportunity, or I should say the redlining out of opportunity, millions of people. Is that a choice? Again, this is the leftist part of things where you have people who want to start charter schools of all colors. Let's be real about this. And start any kind of school because they believe a couple of things that are really important that reasonable thinking people should agree upon. The traditional education system has never served us well. So there should be some attempt to either one, improve that, reform it, replace it, create a competing line of educational opportunities, but something. You should just stick with what you got, which means you're going to set out and create something. There are different types of people in the world. There are settlers, which are the people who live in a place and want to stick with what they got. There are explorers. Those are people who see what they have, but want to go out and see what the rest of the world is doing because maybe there could be something better. And then there are pioneers. There are people that go out, do that exploring, and they never really come back. They form a home in the new place because they find something new and better. In education, the argument very often is between settlers on the left who love what we have right now, who believe that a unionized, bureaucratized, industrialized, standardized system of education that from the top down is a $750, maybe $800 billion boondoggle in which middle-class people are paid handsomely without any account for the money that they're receiving or that they're spending, but no accountability for results for the kids that they're serving. And if you go and you try and upset that balance, you'll have the Trump voter version of the left come after you with the most irrational, crazy, silly things that make no possible sense whatsoever. Do you have charter schools that have done things wrong? Yes. Do you have charter schools that are crap? Yes. Do you have charter schools that should not be open? Yes. Not going to hear me argue against that. Do you have charter schools that that are racist or do illiberal things? Yes. Okay, well then let's close them all. Okay. All right. I'm with you. Let's close every school that hasn't done well by kids, that has had racism involved in it, that hasn't done well by its communities. All right. Let's do that. So I'll agree to close all the charter schools that are doing wrong if you agree to close all the traditional schools that are doing wrong and have been doing wrong. And I'll agree to it even more if you close those schools first. And then we close the charter schools that you have a problem with. Because, I mean, my belief is there's only like 7,000 charter schools. The idea that the left and people on the ground and in union-funded front organizations and white progressive organizations spend 90% of their time in education talking about a group of schools that only serves like 6 or 7% of students, while ignoring the vast network of schools that serve everybody else that are getting it wrong. To me, that is the same thing as the Trump voter, right? This is the thing about that I should have been saying all throughout this. This can sound like an attack on the right or the unthinking people just being those white folks who voted for Trump who say crazy things like this video that I showed. But in truth, it's not that. Because that level of ignorance exists on the left too. And this is where I will agree with my conservative friends, is when the left, oftentimes the educated left, are ignorant about something, you would never know it, neither would they. It is a lot of fancy book learning going on the left in the people who will tell you that education doesn't matter. I will have PhDs on the left who will tell me that education doesn't matter, that the only thing wrong with our schools is money and poverty. If we just had more money and we had more poverty or less poverty, we would have better schools. To which I say, if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle, but she doesn't. So we have to live in the world that we live in, and we have to work with what we got. And we have poor kids. And when you have poor kids, it's not a message to stop teaching, stop thinking about education, stop treating them as human beings and thinking beings, but to educate them like you educate anybody else, right? I've given this analogy a lot of times before. In Minneapolis, we have a hospital that is got world-class services for heart attacks and gunshot wounds. The reason that they have world-class services for both of those things, gunshots and heart attacks, is because they had so much of that coming into their emergency rooms that over time they developed the knowledge and the insight on how to treat specifically that. They didn't sit around and say, well, we wish you would send us better patients. You know, we would be a better emergency room if you would just stop sending us patients with gunshot wounds. What they said was, how do we treat gunshot wounds? And now they're better than all the surrounding hospitals at it. So if you get shot, that's the place you want to go. An educational equivalent of that would be the people who say, we could be great schools if you just send us better students who aren't poor. So why don't we fix society, right? All of that to me sounds equally as dumb as the prototypical or the stereotypical Trump voter that we can pick on for purposes of this conversation. Kulia Pringle, one of my favorite people in the world, says, education is a way out of poverty. this again strikes up against something that the educated left, who now I am going to rail against them a little bit, they challenge that. They dispute that now. Education as being a way out of poverty. You can search right now and you will find articles by people on the left of center who will say education is no guarantee of a better life. A degree is a degree won't close the wealth gap. Again, thinking people need to take their country over. What everybody who has researched anything knows is that the difference in your earnings, if you have less than a high school diploma or a high school diploma or some college or 2 years of college or a 4-year degree or a 6-year degree, the statistics that are associated with each of those educational statuses create a big gap, creates a hierarchy in terms of earnings, in terms of jobs, income, housing, health outcomes. How can education not matter? How can education not be a good thing if you're going to make $1 million less in your lifetime if you don't have a BA, bachelor's degree, versus if you do have a BA, bachelor's degree? It's $1 million difference. It becomes an even bigger difference when you talk about a master's degree. And definitely most of the people who argue with me about these things on the left have PhDs, sometimes more. I even thought I saw something. Yeah, you say it here. I have 3 degrees. Why would I tell people not to educate themselves? You're agreeing with me. I think you think you're fighting me. You spin to conversation to fit your narrative. No, I don't. You're agreeing with me right now. You have 3 degrees and you would still tell people to get educated for themselves, which is something that I'm saying on the left. You have many people who will dispute the fact that education is a mobility inducing factor. Kulia Pringle says, dumb as hell. I don't know who you mean that to. Kadra Mohammed, am I saying your name right? Kadra or Kadra says, I love the hospital analogy. I think the hospital analogy for me works just in this one way, which is it is not political to talk about the nuts and bolts of education and how to make it happen. On the left, you have people who don't want to talk about the nuts and bolts of education because they have given up on wide swaths of Americans being able to be educated, because they do believe that if you are poor, that is the end of the story. And they believe that mostly because their unions and the public employees who govern the public education system have decided and resigned themselves to believe that if they have failed for all these years, there must be something wrong with the kids, not with the institution, not with themselves, not with their unions, their bureaucracies, their school boards, their superintendents, their curriculum, their pedagogy, their teaching, their styles. There must be something wrong with the kid, not anything wrong with all of the rest of that. Kadra or Kadra, I'm going to say Kadra, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong. Education is vital. I used to say I want education so I could move to Edina, which people who aren't from Minnesota know Edina is like one of the higher income suburbs of Minneapolis, and disrupt their racism norms, right? And this is a good point, because Edina is an enclave that is on the border of Minneapolis, and the fortunes of the kids in Minneapolis public schools and Edina public schools couldn't be more different. And they couldn't be more different possibly because of the housing stock in both of those places. And what does it take to get into Edina to be able to afford houses that are ramblers that start at $1 million in a lot of cases? It takes a job, an income, a credit rating, all things that come from your ability to earn. Your ability to earn comes from what you know and what you can do. What you know and what you can do oftentimes comes from your K-12 experience through a college experience. And that experience is afforded to people on very different bases, depending on their address, their race, and their socioeconomic status. People on the left don't want to talk about that as much. There is an anti-intellectualism in both the left and the right. I started this by talking about the anti-intellectualism of the right and how it is killing our country, and it is killing the brains of our country. It is increasing the numbers of people that are dying in a global pandemic. It is making us less safe in the world. It is reducing our reputation in the world as a leader in thought and thinking and science and math and astronomy and anything else that you want to put out there. It is beating up our friends and showing love to tyrants. It is making people in the public completely now start discounting fact checking as a way of life and making convenient opinions, the rule of the day. But they're not the only ones. The right isn't the only one that has that going on. The left has anti-intellectual stuff going on too. And it can't be more clear than anywhere than in the thing that we talk about here every day, which is education. The left is wrong on education. Democrats are wrong on education. And it's not because they're a cognitive technocratic elite. It's because they are a union groveling political hack of a system when it comes to creating agendas around education and education for all. They would rather buy off and tokenize members of our communities who will allow them to say that the only thing is wrong with our schools is that they lack funding and that their class sizes need to be smaller and that society keeps sending them too many poor people and that their schools are crumbling and their buildings and their walls need paint, but never anything about what goes on inside the classroom. You have to think that that's a little bit weird. Why your unity ticket of Biden and Bernie, when they create an education committee, that there's zero that comes out of that about better teaching, about the science of teaching reading, of making people literate, about the absence of that science in the teaching core. Really? You're going to put together an entire committee around what should be the biggest platform for education, and you're going to leave out the fact about teaching. That's anti-intellectual. That's every bit as sloganeering and groveling and pandering to the lowest common denominator of your party as you can say about any conservative, any Republican, or anybody else. ISIS ban has shown up. ISIS, glad to see you here. ISIS says Black children need to know and be exposed to successful people that live with purpose. I agree with you 100%. This thing around education not mattering and there being a cognitive elite and all of this stuff. If you go back and you look at something that we talk about maybe too often on this show, and you look at desegregation times, we talk about white flight oftentimes, but we don't always talk about brown flight and black flight. And in both of those cases, you had a situation where we went from neighborhoods that had a plumber and a janitor and a laborer and an unemployed person and maybe a drunk, and also a doctor and an insurance agent and an attorney because of the way that segregation pushed our communities together. With desegregation, what you saw was a good number of the people who could move out, who had professional positions, leave. And what did that do? That left many children without what they had before, which was, I know a Black doctor. There's one right down the street from me. I know a Black attorney. There's one right down the street from me. I know a drunk. If I want to be that, there's one right down the street from me. It was a full range of of human potential when you had those communities together. So ISIS, I agree with you that that Black children do need to see and be exposed to successful people that live with purpose. And one way of doing that is not to discount people who have done well in life, people who are smart, people like Mott, who have 3 degrees, right? Who is still in the hood, who is still there, and kids do still see him. He can disagree with me all you want, man. You can come and beat me up on this show all you want, but I'm still going to point out the fact that you have 3 degrees, and there are people within your proximity who need to see a person like you with 3 degrees. So we shouldn't beat up on education as a way of inspiring racial progress and progress within our own people. Michelle Johnson, yes, America rewards access to power. I will agree with you there, but people not born with power have a better chance to get to the economic middle class with more education. But people not born with power have a better chance to get to the economic middle class with more education. I think that's where I was going with a lot of this, is to say that the right beating up on educated people being in leadership is wrong and anti-intellectual, and the left discounting the power of education to create opportunity and social mobility for people that they don't think can learn from their side of the fence is also wrong. No, education and college degree doesn't guarantee you anything. Nothing guarantees you anything. But goddamn, if you are a thinking person, if you believe in a rational universe and you believe in facts and reason and research and studies, I haven't found the study yet that tells me that as you go up the ladder in education, as you increase the completion of different levels of education, that your statistical fortunes aren't improved. And in most cases, greatly improved. Kadra Mohammed says, I grew up in Africa where teachers are responsible for producing literate children and parents are tasked with facilitating that. Here in the West, the system wants you to send kids to them for 6 to 7 hours a day for 5 days a week for education. Then when the kid never learns how to read, they blame the parent. It boils down to teachers running away from accountability. I like this point because, well, I like it for more than one reason. I do like the fact that you point out in Africa that there is a two-part partnership in making that child literate, which is you say that the teachers are responsible for producing literate children and parents are tasked with facilitating that. That's a partnership. That's two people like working on that. And I like that point. That actually balances the left and the right. You know, there is some family responsibility in making these things work also. This thing about teachers wanting to run away from accountability, when I think when I say that, people hear a generalization. What I want to point out is teachers aren't individuals when they collect together in a thing called a union, and that union develops hundreds of millions of dollars of a war chest to be able to override elections, local elections, and have their policy implemented as they see fit, and have that policy actually determine the fortunes of people that live in communities that they teach and work in, but they don't live in, right? So the fact that teachers can collect together and bundle their money and put an entire slate of people on a school board who aren't at all representative of the needs of of the schools that board is governing. And then those teachers, through their private organization called the union, end up bargaining for contractual things that have a material value and have a definite impact on what students learn. They end up negotiating with themselves on the other end of the table. That's teachers not as individuals, but teachers as a political force together overriding the system, and they're doing too much. We only got a couple of minutes here. Let me see if I can get through some more of the comments here. Isis Span, a teacher, an educator, a Black teacher who has recently won a grant from the National Parents Union to start a Black educational pod. Don't tell anybody, because that might be privatization. And of course, people on the left think that publicization is amazing, so we shouldn't privatize anything, not even the Black mind. We shouldn't privatize the Black mind at all. Okay, that's me being flip. That's wrong. I should stop that. Isis says you don't have to stay in the hood to serve the hood. Okay, I agree with you. But the initial point that you made that I do want to go back to is that Black children, wherever they are, do need to see the possibilities in life, and they need to see other people like them who have achieved those possibilities. Seeing it makes it real. I think that's what a lot of people in other communities have. Their kids grow up with no doubt, just a certainty about the fact that they're going to achieve things and be successful. Coolio says, you agree with Chris again. So Mott, Mize, and I finally found common ground, because Mott says, and Mott, if I'm saying your name wrong, man, you can correct me too. I'm horrible with names. People who watch this enough know that that's my situation. That's my downfall. He says that teachers' unions are like police unions against the community they claim to serve. And damn if that isn't at the bottom of all of the things I care about when it comes to reform. If you believe that to be true, which I do, I believe that police unions are paternalist, who are made to police the bodies of people, and teachers' unions are maternalists. They are the mom of white supremacy, who are meant to police the minds. So it's just like the old system. They got you cornered. They got you covered in both places. They will steer you directly into welfare or into a prison cell, which to me is why me and Mott disagree on reform, because when I think about creating alternatives, any way out of the current kind of locked up educational plantation, any way out, be it choice, be it false choice, if you want to call it that, be it a voucher, a ticket, a scholarship, a bus that'll get you into the place where people have money, and another school, and another opportunity or whatnot, whatever it is. It sounds like a good step towards liberation for me. And this, I'll go because I got to wrap now at an hour. Michelle Johnson, unfortunately, there are too many high poverty, small Black spaces. Gentrification pushes Black poverty into smaller and smaller spaces, which I'm not going to disagree with. It's a good place for me to end to say just this. Michelle Johnson and the rest of you, we could keep going with the number of ways that the United States is inequitable and the ways in which the game is rigged against the underclass, but specifically the underclass of color. And that game doesn't have a lot of easy answers to fix. It's a 400-year-old game or more. But one thing we do know for sure is I like to get back to simple things. And the simple thing here that I want to say, my message in all of this all over the map thing that I did with you guys today on this issue, is to say we will never be served by lifting up the worst of us and tearing down the best of us. I don't believe that looting is a good thing. So the article that I started with that said in praise of looting, I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a dumb argument to have. I don't think it's smart. But it gets me to my major point, which is I also don't think talking about a cognitive elite, an educational elite, as the problem of the country and making noble the dummies. That doesn't make any sense to me. And people are doing it on both the left and the right, discounting the thing that we talk about here every day. It's very important to me that we don't discount education. And the reason that I will say that is because everything, especially let's just think about Black people. And this is to me what it means to be a Black conservative. And I want to say be very clear about my words here. There's a difference between being a Black conservative and a conservative who happens to be Black. A conservative who happens to be Black is no different than white conservatives and enjoys his time in their circles and parrots and apes their language and sees things in the world and wants to preserve things that they tell him to preserve. So they will sound no different than a lot of these Trump people. A Black conservative wants to conserve the things that have served Black people well in our own traditions. So a Black conservative is one who's not looking for any wild and crazy departures from the things that have always worked for us. One of those key things that has always worked for us is that Black people have always been very clear that literacy is liberation. The ability to read comes with so much power that you don't have when you don't know how to read, that it has to be primary to us. So why would we ever join any movement that's anti-intellectual, anti-education, that tries to sell us the cultural suicide of ideas like college doesn't matter, education doesn't matter, having a degree doesn't make your life any better? Why would we join any movement when everybody from the people who were enslaved, formerly enslaved people of the United States, did everything they possibly could to learn, to read, to count, to do math, not because they were big on education, but because they knew that it was the only way that they could be free. So there are many things in African history. First library in Mali. A Black conservative wants you to remember that the world's first major library was in Mali, was in Africa. A Black conservative wants you to read books like Black Athena and Cheikh Anta Diop's Civilization or Barbarism. That's what a Black conservative wants you to do. A conservative who happens to be Black wants you to believe that America started at 1776. And the liberal antidote to that person wants you to believe that your history started in 1619 and that your entire history has been nothing but trauma porn. A Black conservative beats out both of those people because it wants you to remember the simple things that have always worked for us. I'm going to end by saying One of those simple things that has always worked for us is education is the passport to the future. Those who prepare for it today are ready for it tomorrow. Who said that? Said something like that, you would know who that is. Education is about building character. King told you that. So anyways, I'm going to run. I'm going to run from this now and tell you this is one guy talking. And I'm happy that y'all came with me today and you went along for this ride on this. Do not allow unthinking people to take over your party, your country, your family, your neighborhood, your community. It's never going to be good for you, for your children, for our people. It's going to be the death of us. Education matters. We should fight for it, and we should make sure that everybody has an equal chance to achieve it. Thank you all.